All right, well, good evening, everyone, to our ACS community far and wide. So great to have you here. And this is our second online monthly speaker event. I'm Susan Hopp, a board member of our local chapter, and I'm here with my fellow board member, Gail Koza. So we've really appreciated the positive feedback from our first online talk that we did in September to resume our monthly talks. And for those of you who might have missed the very well-received talk on the Antarctic, we have the recording up on our website, which is acs-sfbay.org, as well as the schedule we're building for the months ahead. So we truly appreciate your donations too, as they do support our mission. And as many of you know, the American Cetacean Society is the oldest nonprofit dedicated to the protection of whales, dolphins, porpoises, and their habitat. And we do this through education, community engagement, and by awarding grants in support of cetacean research. So by being here and through your donations, you are supporting our work. So again, thank you. So we are really excited for tonight's talk, entitled The Behavior and Ecology of Killer Whales in Monterey Bay over the last 30 years. And so we are recording this and ask that you put your questions in the chat box. And after our wonderful speaker has concluded, we will do our best to get to them during the Q&A. Now, we do have a very large crowd tonight, and we are truly gifted to have our speaker, Nancy Black, share her knowledge and eyewitness accounts of these magnificent cetaceans, our killer whales. Now, it's not an exaggeration to say Nancy has more observation experience of the killer whales along the California coast than anyone. And she has a very extensive bio that I've had to condense, but I wanted to just share some of the highlights. So Nancy is a marine biologist with a master's from Moss Landing Marine Laboratories. Her research has taken her to the Bahamas for 6 seasons to study spotted dolphins, to Alaska to study Alaskan killer whales over 12 seasons. And in the late 80s, she was instrumental in banning gill nets in Monterey Bay after her extensive documentation of harbor porpoise entanglements and killings. After 30 years of photo identifying Monterey Bay killer whales and studying their distribution and natural history, she is a recognized expert, and her work on killer whales has been part of the BBC's Blue Planet series, National Geographic specials, and Animal Planet segments. Nancy is committed to educating people about Monterey Bay wildlife, and she does this through her whale watching company, Monterey Bay Whale Watch, and I highly recommend it. She continues her work and her passion through the nonprofit organization she founded this past December, the California Killer Whale Project. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to continue the long-term study of the ecology, natural history, and conservation of California's killer whales. So we're in for a real treat tonight. And so with that, take it away, Nancy.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Susan. Can you hear me okay? Just want to make sure. Okay, so I have lots of information, and I have condensed about 4 hours worth of talk in 45 minutes. And you can get more information later on our Killer Whale website, but I'm just going to go over the highlights. It's hard to talk about 30 years in a short time, but I will do the best I can. Hopefully you'll have more interest to find out more later. Anyway, as she mentioned, I did start my whale watch company so I could spend more time out in the bay looking for killer whales. Since I started that in graduate school, I needed a way to to stay out on the ocean on a regular basis. And that's how that started in the early 90s. And it's kind of grown from then. So I'll discuss various aspects of that. And I'm just seeing why my slide's not moving yet. Just a minute. Hold on a second. Arrow. Okay, here we go. I had to change get out of the laser pointer. So I just wanted to go over a few killer whale facts, just because some people know more about killer whales than others. So killer whales are the most widely distributed mammal. They occur in all the oceans. They live in matriarchal groups. They live as long as humans, same lifespan, and the males will stay with their moms for most of their lives. They are the most intelligent and social of all the whales and dolphins. And females have postmenopausal, just like humans do, which is rare in most mammals. And they do exhibit cultural transmission. So they do teach their young throughout the generations how to hunt, where the best areas are to hunt, where to travel. They have distinct languages, complex communication system, and they're the top predator of all the marine species. They have very high levels, though, of chemical contaminants, which I'll mention just a little bit about. There are different ecotypes of killer whales throughout the world and on our coast as well, which probably are other species, distinct species. They have overlapping ranges, but they don't intermix. And they exhibit strong sexual dimorphism. This is CA24, a male that we've known for many years. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago, but he was our largest male. Quite extreme difference from the females and youngsters. Killer whale males can get up to be about 26 to 32 feet long and about 10,000 pounds. Females about 23 feet and 6,000 pounds. And their dorsal fins start sprouting when they're about 10 to 15. It does vary. And when they're about 20 years old, they have the tall, almost 6 foot fin. They're very similar in their social structure to elephants and matriarchal groups. Elephants also have the females stay with their family for most of their lives. However, in elephants, the males will disperse when they are older, and killer whales, they do not. They stay with their moms. Killer whales spend a lot of time communicating. A lot of their brain is devoted to sound production. Anyway, they have very amazing communication calls, and they can't see very well, of course, because of visibility, so they rely on sound. And a large portion of their brain is devoted to processing sound compared to ours. And since they are distributed worldwide, there's lots of studies going on now with killer whales throughout the world. And there are certain hotspots where they're studied more often than others, but it's very much increasing as people learn more about areas to conduct these studies. Of course, my area is off the West Coast, and I started, as we mentioned, quite a long time ago. My co-researcher is Alisa Schulman-Janiger. She's in Southern California, and we worked together for all those years, compiling information. Also, we have several other co-researchers that have started, Colleen Talty, Tomoko Shimatome, and Bradley Vanston, and several other people. Jared Towers and Ken Balcom are on our board. So we have a really good group now to continue on. So the study area for my location is in Monterey Bay, where I've spent most of my time, although we do collect information on the entire California coast and into Oregon even. Alisa focuses a lot on Southern California, but we do work together in the whole area. Monterey Bay, of course, is very unique because of the canyon that comes in so close to shore. So the killer whales are very accessible to study here compared to other areas. Look, if you go off San Francisco, they do tend to travel along the drop-off. So you'd have to travel quite a bit further, and they're much more dispersed out there. We have very close access to the deep canyon. So if I get a report of killer whales when I'm home, I can run down, jump on the boat in 10 minutes, and sometimes reach them within a half hour. So it's a really good situation to study an animal that's very unpredictable. You just never know when they're going to be there. You can't say, oh, today I'm going to go out and see the killer whales like you can with the humpback. So it's a much harder animal to study, and it takes a lot more time and effort. And that's why the Whale Watch company I have worked out quite well, because we also can collect non-invasive information on the whales by taking photo ID, and we can learn a lot by being out every day. So Monterey Canyon is a very unique area. Of course, Monterey Bay is known now for killer whale predation, and a lot of that has to do with some of the films that you mentioned I was involved with. The main one that started it all was the Blue Planet, the first Blue Planet, when they filmed the killer whale predation on the gray whales for the first time professionally in 1998. It was a long time ago now. They've already gone to Blue Planet 2. And that one we worked for as well. A lot of the lunge feeding humpbacks you saw on Blue Planet 2 with the sea lions were from our vessel. They came out with us every day for like a month or so just to get the best sequences. And also we've been, there's been many other films and TV shows about it. So this area has become quite known for not only whales, they call it the whale watching capital of the world, but also for the gray whales and the killer whale interactions. Of course, it is part of nature. It is a sad thing that they would hunt gray whale calves, but the killer whales need to eat also, and that they are the top predator. So that is a natural event that's been going on as for the two species forever. So just basically some of the information on our killer whale project. It's a long-term study now, and long-term studies are very high value, especially for long-lived mammals, because it takes a long time to learn about them. They live as long as humans do. Female killer whales can live 100 years or a little bit more even. Males less, maybe around 50 or 60 years. We have some killer whales in our population that we know the males are over 50 years old now. And we do have an in-depth publication in the works, because all this information, it's such a long time to gather, and we're putting it all together now, and hopefully we will have a very rich, interesting, long paper on all that coming out very soon. Alisa and I met at a conference of 30 years ago, a marine mammal conference, where I was looking at killer whale slides, and she happened to look over my shoulder and say, oh, I recognize that whale. I see that in Southern California. They had just been seen in Monterey Bay. So that's how we began collaborating. And many other people have been involved. We get lots of sighting information from other people, other whale watching companies as well. So it's been very helpful for their support. We keep track of all the whales through their lives. So an example is a whale we call Bumper. They all have numbers and some have names. So we hope we start sighting them when they're hopefully babies, although we don't see the same group of killer whales every year. The frequently sighted killer whales we usually do see several times a year, but some whales we may not see for a couple years because they do have a large range. So we hope to follow them. We keep track of all the whales and take photos of them. We have much more sighting record for this whale, but just shows a few examples as his fin grows up and he's starting to sprout. Bumper is about 20 years old now, and here he is hunting his own gray whale calf with his family. So he's gone from a baby when I first saw him to now a full adult male involved in preying on other marine mammals with his family and his mother. He still travels with his mother, who's still alive, whose name is Star. These whales are frequently sighted. They're called part of the friendly pod. Bumper got his name because he has gently bumped into some boats due to curiosity. They often just come right up to boats and neutral and are just as curious about us, more so than other groups of killer whales. So this topics I'm going to discuss briefly tonight, and we'll have more information later if you want to know where to find it. Photo identification, of course, is the basis of the study. Just like all mammals, they all can be identified. Elephants, lions, giraffes, any mammal, even other animals, of course, can be individually identified by their markings. And that's the basis where you can learn so much more about their social structure, about their movements, behavior, just by keeping track of the individuals. We keep track of the different ecotypes. So not all killer whales are the same. There's different types we see here. And we're looking at population size, how it's increasing or decreasing, looking at their distribution and movements. We work with other killer whale people up and down the coast in Washington, British Columbia, that hold the catalog, such as Jared Towers and Graham Ellis over the years, John Ford and Ken Balcom, who've been very supportive and helpful. So we learn about where our whales go to when they site them up north. We look at the social structure and their population parameters. You know, do the calves survive? How many last, like Bumper? Not all calves make it till adulthood. There's a high mortality in calves, about 40%. We're looking at predation and social behavior. And more in recent years, over the last like 10, 15 years, there's been an increase in interactions with humpback whales and killer whales, which is a very interesting story that we were all part of a large publication on that a few years ago on the observations of killer whales and humpbacks. And also I have done some sampling under permit about 15 plus years ago over a several year period to collect samples of the whales to look at their contaminant levels like PCBs and DDTs. And I'll mention a little bit about that. And of course, our new technique, very exciting, is the use of drones. I started that about 3 years ago. And there are so many other scientists around the world that are using drones now. They're non-invasive. The whales can't hear them at all. And you can learn so much about the animals from the air that you really can't see from the boat. So it's really a great method, and it's just exploded at the Marine Mammal Conference. There's so many people now that are using drones in their research. So basically photo identification, this is a whale called Glacier. He is CA20. And he's over 50 years old. I saw him the first time I basically saw killer whales. The same year I first saw killer whales, Glacier was here with his family. And we match him up by the nicks and marks on their dorsal fins and saddle patches. So you can actually see 30 years ago, he's got these scratch marks on him, and look at him now. The scratch marks are almost the same, which indicates that a lot of these whales get these marks when they're young. They're getting pushed around, or when they're young, they're not as able to be dominant. Maybe we're just not sure, but it clearly looks like a lot of the marks come when they're young and they haven't changed much. So he looks about the same in 30 years, and that's how we identify all the animals. So here's an example of our catalog. We have a working catalog that we keep, and we have pictures of the whales each year, each time they're sighted. We keep track of that, and it keeps, building as they have new calves, have some die. We never know for sure if a whale is dead, but if they haven't been seen in about 10 years, then we figure they're probably not here anymore, and also based on who they're associated with. But we have had big gaps between sightings, like 6 years. We saw CA111, and it was 6 years since we had last seen it, just recently. So you never know for sure unless a good amount of time passes. We hope we will be putting out this catalog because a lot of people are interested in it. We have established the same numbers we published in 97. So we're consistent. We'll keep, the same numbers, and we have expanded greatly. So the new catalog, which we use for our own in-house work, we're going to put out digitally and also in a book, and it will have the family trees on that. So that's just about done. We also keep track of the different ecotypes of killer whales. So they're not all the same. A lot of you know that, but there are some people here that do not know as much about killer whales, that are just learning for the first time. So I just go over a little bit. These are the types we see in Monterey Bay and along the West Coast. The offshores, they're called. because they were first sighted offshore British Columbia. They tend to have more nicks in them. The resident or the fish eaters, the ones that you hear most about in the news, unfortunately, the southern residents are very endangered. And the transients or the mammal hunters, which are what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the talk. Offshores are known to eat sharks. They're found in large groups. I've seen like over 100 spread out over several miles. And they're basically one population, although they don't all travel together. There's about 300 of them plus 350 in the offshore population that ranges from Southern California to Alaska. And the residents are the most well-known. They eat fish, primarily salmon for the southern residents. And that's a whole story in itself that many of you may be aware of. There's only 74 left in the southern resident population. They're very endangered. They live in pods, and that means many family groups or matrilines, a mother with her recent offspring, form pods. So the southern residents include J, K, and L pod. They're very predictable, or they used to be predictable ranges in the summer. Now they're moving around a lot more because they're searching for salmon in a much wider area than they used to. And the transients is what I'm going to spend most of the talk on. They focus on mammals. They only eat mammals. They don't eat fish. They're found in small groups, like 2 to 7. And that includes the female with her recent offspring. Just briefly, there are other ecotypes. We probably have at least 5 ecotypes that can be seen off Monterey Bay or off the coast here, the West Coast. The ETPs are called that. They're mostly animals from Mexico and Central America. And there has been several sightings of those in Southern California and into Monterey Bay many years ago. Part of the ETPs called the LA pod. And the LA pod was famous for eating the great white shark off the Farallon Islands back in the mid-90s, 1997. And that's when all the sharks disappeared from the Farallons. So we haven't seen that group since, but the ETPs are seen more in Southern California. And then the residents I just mentioned, we see the southern residents in our area. There's different populations of residents as you go up the coast. You have the southern, the northern residents, the Alaska residents, and then it goes all the way over into spreading through the Aleutians are different populations with their own ranges. As you get into Russia and Japan, and actually I was very interested in seeing these types of killer whales in other areas. So I did go to Russia and Japan at different times a few years ago, and I spent some time with the killer whales in both areas. So that was pretty exciting to see them. In Russia, you see them with these huge volcanoes in the background, great scenery. Japan borders Russia. In Hokkaido, you can go and see resident type killer whales, and they do have mammal hunting type there as well. And also I'd planned to go to this area of Russia where the pointer is. That is where bowhead whales hang out, a southern population of bowheads, and killer whales do hunt sometimes the subadult bowheads in that area, very close to shore. And unfortunately, this is the area right here is where they have captured the killer whales for aquariums. You probably heard about the whale jail off Russia. Well, it was here in this area. And they did release them eventually and put tags on some of them, but it was not a good situation. Primarily mammal hunting type live in here. So anyway, the resident and transient type population extends all the way across the Pacific. And then the transients are what I'm going to talk about mostly range from Southern California to Southeast Alaska, which is the West Coast transients. And there's other populations that range further. So our techniques and the very important method we're using now are drones. And I just wanted to say, these are offshore killer whales. I just mentioning a few things before I go to the transients. This is a drone video we took off our whale watch boat a few years ago of offshore killer whales catching a six-gill shark, which had never been filmed before. And we would not have seen this from the boat. So it happens fast. The bubbles come up by the shark. There are 2 baby killer whales, little killer whale. Here's the shark right here, the pointer. This killer whale is holding a 6-gill shark in its mouth. You can see a newborn little killer whale right here. Here's the shark. And this is something that nobody saw from the boat, which is why drones are so important and so amazing. What you can see from the air, what you cannot see from the boat. So here's a close-up. It's carrying the shark, and eventually they fed on it. So it's pretty amazing to document that. And the next type that we see in Monterey Bay are the southern residents. I first sighted those here in the year 2000. 20 years ago was the first time they were ever seen here. I never saw any type of resident killer whale in Monterey Bay previous. And unfortunately, they probably were seen here, and they have been seen several times since, not every year, but they do travel down the West Coast. And that's because they're looking for salmon. They have to travel a lot further to find salmon than they used to, because these killer whales are basically starving to death. And probably many of you are aware of that. But we do see them in the winter or the spring if they come down the coast. And they're pretty amazing. You can see how large group, very active, and they're in a very difficult situation. And actually the sightings that we have documented in Monterey Bay over the years, the last 20 years, has increased the official range for the southern residents, which means they have more protection now down the West Coast, because we've documented these whales and that they're here and they need protection. They need more salmon protection so the salmon population can increase. So hopefully that will happen down the whole West Coast. And now I'm going to focus on the transient. Sorry, these are the Bigg's transient killer whales, and the rest of my talk will be on that. These are the whales we see most often in Monterey Bay. This is Pacific Grove right in the background. They're generally more often a little further out, but we recently saw them just come along Pacific Grove and the coastline and just play in the kelp. Sometimes they'll hunt seals that way. So they're very unpredictable. Like I said, you just never know when they're here. So just briefly, the group size varies from about average group size is 2 to 7, but during the gray whale season, since they are targeting gray whales during the spring, the group size is higher as more whales come to share in the prey. Also, we see them down the lower graph. We see them more often during the spring, which overlaps the time when the mother calf gray whales are migrating north. There's definitely a drop in sightings for the summer, just a month or so. And then it increases again in the fall, which probably related to some of the pinnipeds they're feeding on at that time, especially elephant seals. We see a lot of predation on young elephant seals, and that's a time when they're headed out into the water and they're probably closer to shore. So there are the summer travels of our killer whales to the northern areas when we have that dip in sightings off Monterey. Where do they go? Well, we have many sightings of our California whales up in Washington and British Columbia. This is CA-137 and with his mom, CA-40, we call Xena. And they were seen by Alisa, who happened to be up there on a trip and just happened to see these California whales. They almost followed her up there, I guess, because they have never been seen in that area before. It was a big coincidence. They were seen with other BC whales. So it makes sense that these whales are traveling that far away because they may be mating with whales they're not related with, which makes sense. Killer whales, would try not to mate with closely related animals. So by traveling to another area that's quite far away, they can accomplish that. And so there are about 70% of our whales have been seen up north in British Columbia and more in the outer waters as far as the Queen Charlotte Islands. So just briefly, our whales, here's an example of one whale seen, transient seen off Southern California, off Monterey Bay, off Washington, off Oregon, British Columbia, the inland waters by Victoria, and off the west coast of Queen Charlotte Islands. The longest match we have is Southeast Alaska. So our whales are traveling quite a bit. They never stay in one place very long because their prey would be alert and all the prey would leave. So the killer whales don't just hang off like the Monterey breakwater where there's like 1,000 sea lions. because the sea lions would just leave if the killer whales stayed there. So instead, they frequent hotspots like the Channel Islands is a hotspot with lots of pinnipeds. Monterey Bay is a hotspot. The Farallones, areas off Washington where there's other pinnipeds. And of course, British Columbia has a high diversity of marine mammals. Dall's porpoise, white-sided dolphins, harbor seals, stellar sea lions. So there's lots of prey, but they're not just moving probably just for the prey. They're moving also to be in areas where they can mate with other whales they're not related to. There's different populations of transients. So ours are the West Coast transients. You have the Gulf of Alaska group, you have the Alaska Peninsula group, and then of course I mentioned it extends down to Russia and Japan. In that area, unfortunately, in Russia, some of the prey, especially for the resident type killer whales, has been overfished, like Atka mackerel. Not all residents focus on salmon. So they have overfished that in that area, and that changed the pattern of some of the killer whales there. So they are struggling over there as well, which you really don't hear about too much. And some of the whales off Japan, so research has documented some very deep dives for some of the resident types, like several thousand feet, possibly catching squid or mackerel. And that again is for the residents. So lots of interesting information. So the opposite, the BC whales coming down to California or Monterey Bay has happened. Not as much as our whales going north, is much less is the North whales coming south. So they name their whales with T numbers, whereas we use CA numbers. And there is some overlap between the two areas. So we have numbers that equal T numbers. So in recent years, there have been a few groups from British Columbia that have been, seen up there more often, that have traveled into Monterey Bay. And that we think could be because the population is increasing of transients up in that area, actually quite a bit, probably more so than our transients, it looks like. And they're just expanding their range because of that number. So generally the sightings we have in Monterey Bay are focused along the edge of the canyon. That's kind of a hot spot when the whales are traveling through, or they actually come in the bay and patrol the canyon on the north or south side during the gray whale season. And that way they can intercept any northbound gray whales. So they can be seen pretty much anywhere, but definitely prefer the canyon edges. So going on to social structure, we have looked at social structure over 30 years, which gives lots of in-depth information. You would get a totally different picture if you were just studying them for 5 years or 10 years than you would for such a long time. It takes a lifetime to learn about them and more than that. But generally the main core group, similar to transients up north, is the matriline, which is a mother. Here is Star, where I got the pointer. Her name is Star. She's the matriarch of this group. And Comet on her left is her youngest daughter, about 10 years old. And here is Bumper again. He's about 20. He is her second son. And Orion is about 30, and that is her first son. She has had a few others that have not survived. But they are also known as the friendly pod. And way back in the 90s, they started coming up and curious to boats, and that has passed on through the generations. And this is Star's daughter, Aurora, and she's now her own matriarch with her own family. And they also exhibit the friendly pod behavior. They still join up periodically too. So it just shows you how much their mothers influenced them. Just briefly to go over the matriarchal names and how we name them. So we follow the same pattern as they do up north. They use T numbers for transients. And the matriarch, say this, for example, is CA1. When she has a daughter, that is given the name CA1A, and then following the next born and the next born BC. When her first daughter has her own offspring, then you add another one, CA1A1. Of course, when that one has a daughter, then it gets much more complicated. So in another 30 years, you're going to have lots of numbers and names unless it's changed a little bit. There's a new naming system I'm interested in and how they name elephants. So that's something I'm looking into I won't mention that, but it's, if you ever want to look it up, see how they name elephants. It's by the family name. So here's our summary. We have about 190 animals in our catalog currently. Almost 70% have been seen in British Columbia. Since our catalog, since 30 years ago, 81% of the adult males have died, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's natural. Males don't live as long as the females. 36% females have died since the beginning, which means there's still quite a few whales, at least females, that are still present when we first started because they are so long-lived. Currently in the catalog, we have almost 50% females, reproductive females, which is good. And about 21% of those are adult males. And this compares on the bottom before, in the beginning, when we first started our first catalog to our current catalog. It's very similar as far as the number of percent males, and females is exactly proportional to how it was. So the population looks like it's trending up. We're going to do an official, we've already started a mark recapture study where we can compare that to the photo ID to get a population trend. And we're going to be working with other people there and to include more whales than that in a larger area for the transients. So that'll be a really interesting study. The trend is up. So at least they're not going down, which is good news. It's fairly stable because when we first started, we probably, even though, you know, you look at the first 10 years, we didn't have all the whales identified. It takes so long to do that. Now I'd say we have pretty much all the whales identified, except for the new whales that are coming from BC that we're seeing a little more often now. And some of the examples of social structure here is, we call them mama boys because the boys stay with their mothers probably for most of their lives in most cases. And this is a female. She has 2 sons and they travel with her. Her daughter, of course, when the daughter has their own offspring, then they are off on their own with their own family. We have several groups that now the daughters have broken off in their own families. So that's one example. We have lone males. This is George, Lonely George, we call him, but he's not always alone. He does mix with other whales. And after a male's mother dies, they tend to travel on their own or join up with other males, or occasionally they will mix with like their aunt's family or their sister's family. So we have examples of that. We do have male pairs over the years where, again, the male's mother has died. And instead of traveling on their own, they have hooked up with another male. And these two, 24 and 25, they're no longer around. But back in when the Blue Planet filming in 1998, they did hunt a gray whale calf on their own. Of course, they're 2 strong males and they worked together, coordinated, and they did hunt gray whale together. Later, this 25 switched and started traveling with another male, so that a different male pair formed. So that does happen as well. We also have a group we call the Golden Girls, and those are post-reproductive females that tend to travel together. They do mix with other animals, but that means their sons have died for the most part. If they have daughters, the daughters are off on their own group. So the little old ladies, sort of, I guess you could say, Golden Girls, they travel together. And we've had several sightings of combinations of these Golden Girls, post-reproductive females. These are some of the old timer males. For some people in this talk, they have followed the killer whales off our coast and they know the individuals very well. So I wanted to include some specific names and numbers for people who are aware of that. So we have only 7 males that are still alive from our first catalog, which had 33 males in it total. Just because, as I mentioned, that 24 males have died, we have new males now that have been born and are now doing very well. So they've kind of replaced those in a sense. This is CA10, Obi-Wan, we call him. He was here when I first started, 87. He's still here. We just saw him this year. And he travels with not his mother necessarily, but it looks like it's probably his aunt's family or his sister's family. Glacier, another male that I mentioned before. He still travels with his mother. George is a lone male. This one, 137, is very common, still travels with his mother. Liner, a very well-known, popular male. He sometimes travels with his mother's group, but more often hangs out with his sister's family. And this one also hangs out with his mother. Fat fin, one that we commonly see, he's also a lone male. And his mother died when he was very young, less than 10 years old. And another adult female that had not had her own kids yet, adopted him and raised him. Otherwise, he probably would have died because he was so young. So she raised him. When he got to be an adult, then he headed off on his own, and he now mixes with a variety of other animals. Some other examples include related matrilines will join temporarily. So Emma is one of our very famous, frequently seen matriarchs, and she will travel with her mom, her aunt, and her kids. And that's like the great grandma, the grandma, and the kids. So we have 4 generations that we know now, which is, I find, very exciting to know, such a long span of these individuals. And, the whales that have grandmas, we have noticed, also seem to be more successful, and that's been studied in other areas, and they find that true as well. So it really, because they have somebody teaching them, they have someone with a lot of experience, like a grandma, of course, that she has an important value. Just because she cannot have offspring anymore, they have a lot of knowledge. So, and that's passed on to the young, and they seem to be more successful if their grandma is still alive. Some of our original key females. So as I mentioned, we do see some whales more often than others. And the key females, like 39 is still here with her daughter Hopper. Hopper got its name, of course, because she was spy hopping a lot. So 2 of these have died. 49 and 50 are no longer here, but now they've passed that on to their offspring and the new generations coming up. So we do have some of the older females that are mostly post-reproductive now, the grandmas and great grandmas. So these are all some older ones, but they still travel with their sons or their daughter's family. And this, don't worry about this, just briefly, this is a family tree of these key females. I just wanted to point out the white circle are the key females, and the dark is when they're gone. Now the new generation, this green, are the new generation that are doing more of the hunting. They travel with their own offspring. So basically the population has expanded, of course, over the years. We keep track of who died, who's juvenile, who's post-reproductive. And this is true for all the groups we have data on, but I'm certainly not going to show all that because anyway, I just wanted to get the idea out. We have 4 generations, really exciting. Pretty soon we may have a 5th generation coming along. This briefly, again, just shows in the beginning, this is top line is the early years when we first started. These key females are mostly related. These are the ones we see most often in Monterey Bay. Of course, in the middle years, like 20 years ago, they split up as their daughters travel with their own families. And now at the bottom, in recent years, you can see how they have expanded. And now instead of in 2 groups, they're in 9 groups. So we keep track of all that. It's very interesting to look at their social structure and how that changes over the time. Of course, there's some matrilines we see much more often than others, especially these 5 key family groups. Their range is probably more central to Monterey Bay, whereas all the other matrilines that we don't see as much probably have ranges that are centered like off Oregon or Washington or other areas, and they just periodically show up in Monterey Bay. So we have now the 2nd generation matrilines are starting to be some of the primary hunters, especially for gray whales. So that is shifting now. So that's still part of that same group I showed you in the family tree. And this is just to show that all the transients are linked here. They've all been seen with each different groups at different times. There's lots of mixing. So they're all some of them are closely related. There's like 3 groups that are probably family groups that are very closely related in this area. And also now I'm going to mention about predation behavior. Of course, Monterey Bay is highly productive. It's a major upwelling zone along the Central California coast, which means there's a high diversity of prey here. So we have several species of pinnipeds, seals, and sea lions. We have several baleen whales here, humpbacks, blue, gray, minke, fin. And we have dolphins and porpoise, several species as well. And of course, with this high diversity, why we see killer whales frequently, of course, being the top predator. And of course, the predation on gray whales, as I mentioned, is a key feature that we have documented in Monterey Bay, documented it quite well. We have 90 observations of predation behavior on gray whales over 30 years. And that's doesn't happen necessarily every spring. There are some years we haven't seen it at all. And some years we've seen it up 16 times. A lot of times we will arrive when they have already killed the calf and they're feeding on it, because feeding can last up to 2 days, especially when there's many killer whales involved. So this is quite a battle of nature, battle between whales. It goes on for quite a while. During the filming of The Blue Planet, the hunt and the attack lasted 6 hours, to the point where they ran out of film. Back then they were still using film. And Doug Allen, he was the primary photographer. He saved a little bit of film for the very end. Of course, now they're using digital and it's changed quite a bit. Gray whales, these are a pair of mothers and calves that are traveling very close to shore. So during the northbound migration, mothers and calves travel very close to shore, and that's to keep them safe from killer whales. However, when they get to Monterey Bay, they have to cross that canyon, and that does put them in the danger zone. So killer whales have an advantage to hunt gray whales in Monterey Bay compared to other areas along the coast. But certainly killer whales do hunt gray whales in other areas besides Monterey Bay. There's, of course, the Aleutian Islands when they go through Unimak Pass or False Pass. That's a bottleneck, and there's other killer whales that catch them up there. But Monterey Bay is accessible and it's easy access, so we see it a lot more here and can study it the best given the opportunity. So as I mentioned, drones are amazing. So it's opened up a whole new window of knowledge about these killer whales, and especially their predation behavior, by using such a non-invasive thing as drones. Like I said, they can't even hear it, and you can learn so much about them. So that actually was, this is a calf. There's a killer whale in the background. This calf is under attack. And of course, one of the things to try to get away is to try to get on top of its mom. Of course, that only lasts for a short period of time. They're trying to keep, their soft belly and underside out of the water. The mom does what she can to protect the calf, but if they're over the canyon, it's very hard. Emma is our top hunter. She is amazing and her mother's still alive, and she does have 3 offspring, and she has 3 grandkids. So her family involves 7 whales, and just only that family can hunt a gray whale calf on their own. They're very coordinated, and she is, clearly the best hunter. We had a couple years ago, out of 11 attacks, Emma's family was involved in 10 of them. So it appeared to be they were binge feeding, which we had never seen before. So you can still see totally different things, of course, even after 30 years. We just thought, how much more can she eat? Because, they were hunting a lot of gray whales, but of course, other family groups of killer whales were coming in as well. So it wasn't just her, they were sharing with others. But she did really take advantage. That was a year with the large number of calves coming through. She caught a calf in 20 minutes. That's a record. That's very fast. The average is about 2 hours for killer whale group to hunt and then start feeding on a gray whale. So here is Emma again from the drone. You can see the calf and the mom, and a lot of it involves bashing and kind of hitting the calf with their head. Also, here's Emma. Of course, they could injure the jaw of the gray whale. The baleen's kind of missing. So it involves lots of hard work by the killer whales. They work together. Here's Emma. Louise is her daughter. And Emma actually has 2 nicks. They're working together to block the calf with Emma and her family. Louise is her daughter. This is Emma. She has two nicks in her fin. It looks like an M. So we gave her the name Emma. I have a special cat named Emma. Her name is Emma Louise. So we named Emma's daughter Louise. That's how she got her name, from my cat, and also because the marking in her fin. But I did see them since they were first born, so they have a special connection with me. So here there's 4 generations working together. Here's the great grandma right here. And here's Emma, and she has her kids and grandkids there too, all hunting and all sharing in the prey. Here is Emma on top of the calf. That's what finally happens at the end when they try to hold them under. And at the very end, they'll push them down. And I just wanted to show, this is a drone video. Instead of showing lots of slides, just quickly, I'm going to show this is from the drone. And this is how we can stop frame it. And we've learned amazing things about who's working together, who's hunting. You can see the killer whales below, lots of ramming, lots of rolling going on. The calf is trying to stay as close as it can to the mom. The killer whales are working together to try to separate the mother from the calf during these events. And the killer whales are so powerful. It's amazing from the air. You can't see this from the boat. So if you're squeamish about it, you would not see this from the boat. It looks much more, splashing. But from the air, we can learn about who's working together. Are the calves involved? What's really going on, and which whales are doing most of the work. It's mostly the adult females, the reproductive active females, that are doing most of the work. In this case, Emma. She is like the main hunter. I want to go to the next one. The killer whales have gotten so good now at hunting. This is right off Monterey Harbor, like right off the aquarium. Here's a adult gray whale trying to escape. These killer whales had come in from the distance, so other killer whales can hear the attack going on, and they will come porpoising in from far away. So once the feeding starts, they share in the prey and take turns. This is gray whale carcass. Look at they're right in there, all grabbing blubber. Again, you would never see this from the boat. So, I mean, we don't even see this going on basically, because it's happening kind of, below the surface a little bit, but they are pulling apart blubber. I mean, this is of course very important food for them. They binge feed, it seems like, so they're gaining a lot of calories, a lot of food in a short period of time. And they do pull the carcass down often to get to be neutrally buoyant, it seems, and that might be easier to feed on at that depth. And then it eventually pops up again. Here is Louise as a calf. This is a while ago, and even the little calves are feeding, learning to hunt gray whales. Of course, it takes many years for them to learn how to hunt. And they don't like the intestines, so you'll often see piles of intestines and lungs, the things they don't like, floating on the surface. And it's not true that they only eat the tongue. Here's the whole gray whale. This is what's left of a gray whale. There's the fluke. It's basically like an outer part of the blubber. Everything else is gone. When there's many killer whales involved, they will eat more of the gray whale. If there's only a few killer whales, then much less. So it's a myth that they only eat the tongue. Here's a case where, yeah, they did catch the tongue, and the lower jaw is kind of ripped out in the blubber. But if there's only a few killer whales there, then they don't eat all of it. But, I keep hearing people say they only eat the tongue, and that's not true at all. The rest of the gray whale doesn't go to waste. It goes to the bottom, and there's so many other animals that some worms actually only feed on bones of baleen whales. They only feed on whale bones. So they do rely on these carcasses to feed the animals on the bottom. And besides one group coming in, so basically many other killer whales, as I mentioned, will come porpoising in from the distance. I've noticed when we've had several boats out, we've had planes up, you can see the killer whales are often spread out in small groups over many miles. And even from 10 miles away, if they hear a predation event happening because of the vocalizations, the killer whales are very excited when they're feeding. They will come porpoising in from miles away, and you'll see that happening as the event goes on. Not in all cases, sometimes it's just a few, but often there are many involved, and they're all sharing. So The average group size is about 2 to 7, but when they're hunting gray whales, we have seen identified 50 different individuals, and that happens to be the number exactly 50 we identified, spread out over an area, kind of taking turns and sharing in the prey. So it's a way for them to gather together, and they can socialize and interact with whales that they don't often see as much during the rest of the year. So it's quite a sight, you know, when there are many different matrilines in the area during these events. Of course, like I said, the group size varies. The most we've seen is 50. The average number of killer whales is between 11 and 15 when they're hunting. And of course, cultural transmission is highly important. If you put killer whales in Monterey Bay who had never seen a gray whale before, they would not have a clue on how to hunt. It takes a lot of technique, a lot of practice, lots of energy and learning over many years to do that. So just briefly, the key females I keep mentioning, you know, now it's shifted from those key females when I first started that were doing most of the work. So in over 80% of the attacks, there would be between 2 and 4 out of the 5 key females involved, and they're mostly related. And Emma, of course, here's her notch, is the most efficient. Now this group, the 51As over here on the right, they killed their first gray whale on their own 2 years ago. So they've separated from their mom's group, which are the 51s right here. And within 2 hours, just these 3 killer whales have learned enough because they've come from an important family. The 51s are also great hunters. And in fact, that season, a week later, this group, 4 of them got their own gray whale. So they don't need a lot of killer whales to actually get the calf, but they're doing it to share in the prey. There's a lot of food available. The 39s, they can be there with their aunt, grandmother, grandkids, all working together during the hunt. And these matrilines that I mentioned, these key female matrilines, some of course we see more often than others, and the red are the original ones. Now it's shifting to the second generation, and they're doing more of the hunting. So basically a matriline is 2 to 7 animals, and there's about on average 3 family groups together during the attack, but there can be as many as 17 different families involved. Don't worry about this too much, but this is what we can do every year. This is happened to be a great year. 2004, there was many different predation events. Each circle represents a family or a matriline. So this involved 3 families. Then this is every day, going out every single day. It takes a lot of effort to study this, but we have high effort. And the next few days were different families in the Monterey Bay. There was a second kill that involved the same matriline. You can see the mixing. 4 days later was the third kill. They're feeding on it here for 2 days. So second day, other families join. So they're sharing in the prey. And if we hadn't been there for the first day, you would never know that, you know, who killed or who did most of the work in the hunt. So being out there all the time really pays off. So we can get information like this, which families are around. We have worked with Southwest Fishery Science Center and NOAA because they count the number of gray whale calves moving north each year, just a couple hours south of us. We can correlate that. We have all the data for all their years. And some years, this is a real peak. The sightings of killer whales and attacks are on the top, and obviously it kind of corresponds when there's more gray whale calves coming through, then there's more sightings and more attacks. Again, this is for the last 25 years. The bar shows the number of gray whale calves. The red line is the number of attacks, and the black are the number of killer whale sightings. Again, it corresponds. It shows, you know, peak years when there's lots of gray whale calves coming through, there are more attacks. And there can be killer whales sighted quite often in years when there's not as many gray whale calves. And that's probably because they're thinking, where are all these calves coming? You know, how come we're not seeing them? So they're still looking for them because it's such an important prey source. They do primarily hunt gray whales in the area. Blue whales, of course, we see they're the largest whale. And they are big scaredy cats. They are the largest whale, but they're most afraid of the killer whales. So this happened to be in the air with the drone. This is a group of killer whales. The blue whale has no idea they're there. And they just, for the heck of it, killer whales are looking for fun, a little excitement. They just decided they're going to go harass a blue whale today. So 5 killer whales came running over. The blue whale gets amazingly startled, and it spent the next 20 minutes porpoising full speed. We couldn't even keep up with it as it tried to flee. Although the killer whales were not hunting it, it was just a kind of a fun event. Dolphin hunts happen very fast. That's another main prey of killer whales in the area. They don't just focus on gray whales during the gray whale season. They also eat other species as well. This happens fast. There was the dolphin toss. And they probably eat a lot more dolphins than we're aware of because, again, it happens so fast. A gray whale hunt is, a couple days, so that is happening, but other species happen faster. This is a sea lion, a big male sea lion being kind of hit by another killer whale. Sea lion attacks actually last, they can be prolonged. It takes time for them to kind of, injure the sea lion and also teach their young how to hunt as well. And sea lions can be a little more dangerous with their teeth. This is a harbor seal, and this is Lonesome George. He often, when he's around, will frequent areas like off Hopkins Marine Station or Carmel Bay where there's harbor seals, and he feeds on catches them on his own because he is a lone male. So he kind of grabs them. Harbor seal attacks happen very quickly. You don't always see what's going on because it's so fast. Here is Star. She tossed this seal with their fluke about 20 feet in the air. It was amazing. Daniel got a photo of it, and she caught it midair. But no, I'm kidding. This is a different picture, but it looks like it could have happened that way. Here is an adult male elephant seal with the young bumper, facing off, and they can catch elephant seals. They're deep divers, so they try to prevent them from diving. And here is a young little wiener elephant seal. This is one of their main prey. They eat a lot of young elephant seals. We have lots of observations of that. It does happen fast. Here's another toss. And this is a bird. It's a rhinoceros auklet I'm going to show. And this is a killer whale practicing. They have to practice how to hunt. They teach their young. Here is the bird right here. Here's the rhinoceros auklet. They can't fly very well. And the mother will do that. And we'll see the calf imitate the mother. So they practice with seabirds, kind of play with them a little. Another very interesting event I'm just briefly mentioning is this amazing interaction between humpback whales and killer whales. We did a big joint paper with many people and observations that was published a few years ago. And Bob Pittman led that. He collected sightings from many whales. So I'm just going to show a few seconds. This, if it shows, this is humpback whales mobbing killer whales. Humpbacks will come charging in and try to prevent killer whales from feeding or attacking their prey. I saw one day a killer whale group tried to hunt 3 different sea lions, and every time they came in, a different group of humpbacks came charging in, trumpet blowing, and pushing the killer whales away from that. So there could be many ideas for that. Killer whales are a predator of humpbacks, not in this area. They don't get the adults, but they do get the young humpbacks, especially in Mexico. So it's a really interesting observation that's happening more and more over the last 15 years and increasing more recent. And that's because there's a big overlap between where the humpbacks are feeding and where the killer whales are hunting. And because of all this amazing activity in the Bay, we do work with many different film crews, which I really enjoy doing. It's a very interesting thing to be involved with. This is about $100,000 camera, a GSS. It is inside a housing and it's stabilized. It's amazingly stabilized. So the boat can be bouncing around. It's also got a zoom on it, like something that's half mile away looks like right next to you, and it's very sharp. So you don't have to be next to the whales. You don't have to be close to them. You don't disturb them or anything to get amazing footage. Of course, it takes a lot of time and effort out there. You have to be at the right place at the right time. And anyway, part of the reason they all come here is because you can see such amazing things. Here's a male penis right there. Look at that, how long it is. And he is interacting with a juvenile male. So mostly we see male-male interactions. A mom doesn't really let her daughter be involved in something like this, but her sons, her young sons, are involved with other males. So it's obviously a social behavior. It's something going on between the males that is quite common, but you wouldn't see it from the boat as much. Also, we can use pole cams and underwater drones nowadays to learn a little bit more about the underwater behavior. And I look forward to working with a permit to do some camera tags. You can put some, it's not playing, you can put some camera tags, suction cup camera tags on the killer whales. And people in Norway and other places have started doing that. And it falls off after a short period of time. But, you know, we hope to see what's really going on below the surface. This is a tow cam. We tow the camera behind the boat and the killer whales are following us. And sometimes they get a little curious about it. This is a young killer whale kind of checking out the camera. And when they're doing this, they can, after a hunt, after they're eating a gray whale, they can be social and playful with all those other killer whales that are involved for many hours. So it's a big social, a big party often happens when it's a predation event. And I'm getting close to finishing. This is another amazing event. This is a young whale. They're being very gentle with this whale, not aggressive. And it's a very touchy, very tactile situation. And this is after a predation, a big social event, big party going on. So they are very touchy-feely. Again, you would not see this so much from the boat. So I just find it really amazing to have an opportunity to see. This is obviously a very calm day, which makes a big difference. It's not always like that. And the last topic is chemical contaminants. I did sample under permit several years ago, back about 15 years ago. We did a lot of sampling, working with NOAA and Marilyn Dahlheim and people up north, and to look at chemical contaminants, DDTs and PCBs. They are persistent in the environment. They do not biodegrade. And unfortunately, California being in a populated area has a lot of chemicals. The killer whales accumulate it to the highest level. So look at the PCBs. These are my samples from Monterey Bay compared to other killer whales up the coast. They're the highest, and that is not good. Of course, it could be one of the reasons the males die young or younger than the females, is because males accumulate the chemicals for their entire life. Females, unfortunately, pass those chemicals on in their milk to their offspring. So the first offspring of a female gets a dump load of chemicals, and that could be why there's a higher mortality in the calves. The second calf gets less chemicals. So unfortunately, there's not much you can do about it. This is in the environment. It's in the bottom. It's going through the food chain of the sea lions and into the whales. And here's DDT. Look at, this is my samples from DDT. It's off the chart. It's so high compared to the others. And that's because DDT was dumped in the ocean in Southern California by Montrose chemical plant in the 70s, and it just doesn't biodegrade very easily. So it's still in the environment. It's still passing through the food chain. So this is something the killer whales have to deal with. If they become stressed or low in weight, they metabolize their fat, and those chemicals could impact their immune system and their reproductive system. And lastly, of course, climate change is something, a big topic. And for some areas, like a plus for killer whales in the Arctic. Killer whales that live in the Arctic are now starting to access areas they never did before because of the ice. They're starting to hunt belugas and narwhals a lot more than they used to. So and other seals up there. They're doing really well because of that. But other whales, like our killer whales off California, who rely on gray whales during part of the year, the gray whales are very concerned about because they rely on amphipods that live on the bottom, and they need the algae that lives under the ice. So they need some level of ice to have a good prey population for the gray whales. If the gray whales don't get enough to eat, then the killer whales don't have calves to hunt. So there's much fewer calves born on years when the ice is very low. And last year in the Arctic was the lowest ice so far they've recorded, which could have been an anomaly, they're saying, but it's a trend of something to come. Also, of course, the prey populations that animals like seals and sea lions and dolphins that rely on anchovies and squid off our coast, those animal prey populations could be reduced because of the warming temperatures. So something to be concerned about. And lastly, I wanted to thank the photographers that have contributed photos to me. I'm often stuck driving the boat and I don't get to take my own photos as much. So I appreciate that. Our drone operators, Jason and Mike. And thank you to everybody who's given us sightings. Here's our killer whale project. If you'd like to, we're just finishing the website, californiakillerwhaleproject.org. If you go, you can enter your email and receive updates and a notification when our published catalog will be out, or the digital one. Here is our group members. We're very happy to have Ken Balcom as advisor. He is father killer whale. He's studied killer whales longer than anyone in the world up in the Pacific Northwest with the Southern Residents, and Jared Towers, who is part of the Canadian Department of Fishery and Oceans, and he manages killer whale research in Canada. So we feel very lucky and privileged to have them aboard. Also, you're welcome to come out with me on my whale watch trip. I do longer trips, and that is it. I didn't mean for the slide to go away, but thank you very much. And that's what I got.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Nancy. We have a bunch of questions for you from our participants. I'd love to run through some of them. Okay. Can you hear me okay, first of all? Let me make sure.
I can, yes.
Okay, super. All right. Let's start out kind of with questions around lifespan and causes of death. So we have questions. What are some of the top causes of death of killer whales? And does anyone prey on killer whales?
First of all, nobody preys on killer whales. They are the top predator. In fact, if you put a killer whale against a great white shark, the killer whale is a top predator. Killer whales have been known to eat white sharks off the Farallon Islands, that particular LA pod in 1997. And in South Africa, they're known to eat white sharks, is to the point where now a lot of white sharks have disappeared from the areas people used to go shark look, in the cage diving for sharks. Killer whales have showed up. Many white sharks have washed up on the beach with their livers missing, and that's something that killer whales like. So there was evidence of that. So they do not have any predators. However, of course, human impact is a big thing because their prey population, such as salmon, is managed by humans, and that is being done is very poor in some areas where there's not a lot of salmon. We don't know a lot why killer whales die because they don't strand on the beach very often at all. They mostly just die out at sea. We don't even know they're dead for sure unless we use like 10 years. If we haven't seen a killer whale in 10 years, then we assume it's dead. Or if we know it's still, the mother's still alive and they're always highly associated, of course, with a youngster, that's a good indication as well. With the resident types, they know much quicker if an animal has died because they're always in the family group and they see them so often. So, they know right away. But it's very hard to determine a cause of death. I mean, some of it could be related to chemical contaminants, but we just don't get enough strandings at all to determine that.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions about lifespan. Why do you think there's such a difference in the lifespan of males versus females? That's part one. And then part two is around when do the females go into their post-reproductive stage of life?
Well, not exactly sure, but in a lot of mammals, males have a shorter lifespan in general, even with humans. But a lot of animals, males could be more involved in competition, competing with females. They have higher stress. And of course, one of the reasons it could be because throughout the world, these chemical contaminants, have been used for so long. They were only banned in the 70s. So think many years before that. So a lot of the killer whales that are, alive now, had interacted with a lot of those chemicals. And as you can see, they're persistent in the environment. The males do not get rid of the chemicals. They continue to increase and build throughout their life. So an older male is going to have a much higher chemical load than a younger one. Whereas females, like I said before, pass those chemicals onto their calves in their milk. So it's bad for the calf, but that is the way the females get rid of those chemicals. Just that's what happens because it's fat dissolved, fat soluble. So that could be one of the reasons. And what was the other part of the question?
Oh, about females. Around what age do they go into their post-reproductive
Probably like
stage?
around 40 or so, 40 or 50, within that range, 45, somewhere in that area. And they can live to over 100 years. So there's quite a time period where they are post-reproductive. And, you know, like I said, they're still a valuable part of the family. So it's unusual, you know, besides humans, there's not many other animals that have a post-reproductive phase. Most animals can continue to have calves until their death.
Great. You mentioned that the killer whales are the smartest of the cetacean family, and someone commented that they were curious about that because they thought dolphins were very smart, and I thought you might want to talk about dolphins and killer whales.
Well, actually, killer whales are considered the largest member of the dolphin family.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is a whale. So there's toothed whales and baleen whales. Killer whales really, you know, are probably in their own separate. I think eventually they'll separate them from that family, but they are considered a dolphin. So, and they have, you know, a very high percentage of brain weight to body weight, and that's considered a feature of high intelligence. So similar to chimpanzees and gorillas and humans, you know, there's a high, their brain is high weight and compared to their body weight. So they are a dolphin, really.
Right. Another question about the different ecotypes. Have you ever come across interbreeding between the different ecotypes?
No, and I don't think anybody has. I mean, basically, they kind of avoid each other up in the Pacific Northwest because they have much narrow areas in their waterways. Residents have been in one area, transients in the other area, and you know they've kind of passed and just ignore each other. Maybe a few occasions, very rare, there's been a little avoidance by, I think, transients from trying to get away from the residents. So there is no association. They don't even intermix at all. They just like are not seen together, and their genetics are totally separate. They've taken samples, of course, compared genetics of resident type and transients, and it's like they're from different oceans. So they have been separated for many years. It's like a cultural thing too. I mean, they're just, you know, basically they're probably different species, which fits the definition of different species. They do not interbreed, they do not intermix, and genetically they're completely different.
Thank you. We have a few questions about pod structure and breeding. One is, how do you identify who the matriarch of the group is?
Well, the matriarch is the female, the adult female that, you know, she has her first calf, and then she continues to have calves. And after so many calves are born, her first daughter will have her own calves and then split off into her own group. So the matriarch is really the adult female of the group, and she lives with her offspring. So you can only identify the matriarch if you've been doing studies for a long time. If I just saw a group of killer whales that I didn't know, then no, I would not be able to necessarily know who the matriarch is. It comes from studying and their relationships over, you know, a longer period of time.
And how do the golden girls fit into that structure?
Well, the golden girls, there's about six or seven whales that are post-reproductive that we don't see that often. They're not the frequently seen as group as the others. They recently we saw 3 of them together, 26, 33, 35. Those are their numbers, and they don't stay together all the time. They have more of a fluid association. So we see them often together, like that picture I showed of 5 golden girls together. And then we had a sighting of 3. But on another occasion, one of those would be off with another family group. So there's, you know, mixing around quite a bit. They don't have really long-term strict associations like a mother and her offspring do. But it just seems to be that, rather than being by themselves, they hang out with, like people do, maybe, people of your own age, ladies of your own age that do not have calves. And, I don't really have a better explanation than, that's just their pattern and, what they like to do.
Right. And then similar question related to the males that leave the pod. When they leave the mother's pod, where do they go? Do they pair up with, I think you talked a little bit about this, but maybe you can elaborate. Do they pair up with another matriarch? What do you observe?
Well, usually they would, most often for all our observations, except for one or two exceptions, the male would not leave its mother's pod unless his mother has died. So he will stay with his mother for most of his life. Like we have those old timer males, several of them are still with their mothers after 30 years. But if the mother dies, then the male initially sometimes will, like I'm talking about some specific examples. In one case, hung out with his sister. So it was him and his sister that were left. The mother died. The two of them stayed together for a while. She was a younger female, didn't have calves yet. So she was not a baby, but not old enough to have a calf. So they hung out for maybe a year or two. And then the girl of the group went on to live with her aunt and stayed with that family that, had another matriarch with offspring. And now she has her own kid and she still associates with them. The male, he eventually went off on his own. So eventually the males usually just go off on their own, or like I showed in the picture, they may join up with other lone males and pair off together. But they probably are not as successful in their lifespan without their mother, because their females are so important, the matriarchs, that males don't seem to do as well if their mother has died. I mean, they can live for many years, some of them, but not all of them. And that can contribute to maybe an earlier death for some of the males, just without, they're such mama boys, without, that close association with their mother, it's probably harder for them.
Got it. Okay. Changing topics a little bit. We've had a few people ask about how they can get involved in learning more about killer whales. So we have some students, they're undergrad and advanced degree students wanting to know, if they have an interest in wanting to study killer whales, where do you suggest they move next? What's their next step to try to get involved? And are there opportunities that you're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, there's many places that have intern programs. We have an internship program on our Whale Watch and also on some of our research projects. We did a film trip recently and we took one intern along with us that shifted. So we have that. Other organizations, other nonprofits or other whale watch companies often have interns that start collecting research. And once you volunteer, you have to pay your dues. Like I was an intern for many years. I volunteered at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito, which really increased my interest in whales and dolphins. And, it's important to volunteer. So anywhere you can, just look. The Marine Mammal Society has called MARMAM. You can go on there and they often post groups or organizations that have openings for interns. I mean, sometimes they'll pay a small stipend. I'd say mostly it's volunteer. Sometimes you even have to pay a little bit, for your living expenses. But if you're really persistent, I'd say persistence wins, because we get lots of people, that ask me that to, if they could work with me or help or come out with us. And it's the people that are most persistent that are most passionate about it, that usually, get the position, because, it just shows their strong interest and they're always, you always are aware of them. They're either show up or contact them. So just be persistent, because it can be hard. It's actually, pretty popular to do, and there's probably fewer opportunities, but if you look, you will find them. And if you're persistent enough and passionate enough, you can do it. When I was in college at UC Davis, where I got my undergraduate, my advisor, when I said I was interested in studying whales, he laughed at me and he said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. You could never study whales. That's horrible. You have to think of something else." And that was like my freshman year, and he discouraged me. And so I never went back to my college advisor again for the rest of the time. So, I mean, I think, if you're passionate, and look what I got to do. I was persistent and thought of my own job. I created the Whale Watch company so I could, stay and continue my killer whale project. So if you're passionate enough and you look around enough, it should work out.
Thank you. That's great. We have a few more questions related to pods and sexual behavior. At what age do the killer whales reach sexual maturity, and then how do they actually mate? If the males stay with the mothers, when are the opportunities for them to mate?
Well, a male might, be sexually mature a little bit, maybe in his early to mid-teens, but they don't seem to be reproductively active until they're maybe about 20. So, it's a long time, just similar to people a little bit in the same sense. In some cases, like with some of the resident types, they, seem like they want to mate with animals that are not as closely related to them. Although in that sense, they're kind of more within their JK and L pod, mating within that, but not within maybe their same matriline. But with our whales, the transients, even some people suggested that killer whales are looking for animals that don't speak the same language as them, because they all have they all have different dialects, especially for the fish eating type. You can actually tell which pod it is if you put a hydrophone in the water and hear their vocalizations. So killer whales appears to be seeking out groups that, are very distant, like speaking French instead of English. They're going to go seek those whales out because they know they're not related to them naturally. And our whales, I think that's, one of the reasons why we have such a high number of our transients that are seen up north in Canada during the summer. I mean, they might be there other times, but we have people aren't studying the whales up there in the winter as much because of the weather. However, we are studying them here year round. We have effort year round. So there's definitely a decrease in the summer. And, they're probably going up there to interact because they have been seen up there mixing with other transients that are most often found in British Columbia. And then, that's probably when they're mating, I would guess, is most often the case. So, I mean, that makes sense. Beyond that, people don't see mating so much. I mean, sometimes you will see, especially with the residents, a male going after a female. I mean, sometimes a few times we have seen, a male and female interacting here, not from the same matriline. It's much more often the male on male thing is just it's just like a part of their social life. It's nothing weird or anything. It's just like that is part of their social activity. But the actual mating is very rare to see. So, they're just seeking out animals, it appears, that are not closely related to them by either traveling long distances or listening for animals that don't speak their language.
Great, thank you. We have a lot more questions. I'll try to get through a few more of them. Let's see. Questions about stressors. So one person mentioned that she's aware that the southern residents are heavily reliant on fish, and the fish populations, salmon populations in particular, are really plummeting, and that is a huge stressor for the southern residents. Do the transients have similar prey abundance pressures? And then part two, do you see, in addition to cases where the southern residents come down to Monterey Bay apparently to feed, do you think there are other factors at play, such as climate change, changing oceanographic processes?
Yeah, well, the transients actually their prey populations are doing very well. In most areas, there's a huge abundance of seals and sea lions, dolphins and porpoises. So they don't have the same prey stress like the residents especially the southern residents. The northern residents are doing very well. It's kind of odd. And I know, people are studying that. They're trying to compare the northern residents to the southern residents to see what is the difference between them. Why is one doing so much better than the other? And there's other reasons besides food. I mean, boat traffic, lots of noise, lots of shipping noise, that the naval blasting sounds that they've done, big, really loud, distressing sounds that happen in the southern resident area, chemical contaminants. So there's many factors that are all playing together. It's not only the salmon, because the northern residents, just don't have as bad of anywhere near the problem that the southern residents are doing. But once they start getting into their blubber layer and they, have a diet that they're not getting enough to eat, then the chemicals metabolize and gets into their system, and that affects their immune system and reproductive system. So it's like a big chain reaction. The transients don't have that. They do have the much higher loads of chemical contaminants in them than the residents, and that's because they're higher on the food chain. They're eating prey like seals and sea lions that are also high in those contaminants, but it may not affect them until, they have that part where they become skinny. If that happens, if they become sick or injured temporarily and they lose a little weight, then they could be really impacted by those contaminants. So transients don't have that problem. In fact, their population is increasing in the north. However, down the line, there was a study done that suggested there's about 14 areas in the world with killer whale populations that have very high chemical contaminants in them. And one of those is ours off the California coast, and like off Central America, the whales off Costa Rica are even higher in those contaminants than the ones in California. And those populations, they've extrapolated, and eventually they won't survive. So only some killer whale transient populations in the world, or at least the ones that focus on mammals, are predicted to get through this down the line. And ours is not one of them, which is sad to think that could happen unless somebody, figures out a way to clean these chemicals out of the ocean. So anyway, there's quite a difference. The transients don't have the same food stress at all like the residents.
We're getting a little long on time, so I do want to ask one more question, and then I apologize for the questions that we were not able to get to. We can certainly, download a list of those and try to see if we can come up with answers that we can share through our newsletter out to the folks who participated. So one last question, and it's about how much do we know about the communications between the transients? I know that the southern residents have been studied very well. Can you just talk a little bit about what we've learned about transient vocalizations and how sophisticated they are, and what you're aware of at this point?
Well, that's something that I haven't studied as much yet. I mean, I'm interested in it. We do collect hydrophone recordings when we can, but there's always that dilemma of you're trying to keep up with the killer whales and document what's happening. To get the recordings, you have to stop the boat and just, kind of stay in one area. But we do know, of course, there's been lots of people that have tried to record transients, and I have too, and they're very quiet when they're hunting. So before they catch anything, they are silent. If you put the record, the hydrophone in, whereas fish eaters or residents are much more vocal because the salmon don't, seem to be affected by their sounds. But as soon as dolphins or any animal or, pinnipeds hear a vocalization of killer whales, they take off full speed. I mean, you can see dolphins. It's amazing to see like 1,000 dolphins and dolphins simultaneously, like they all just flee, just leap out of the water and take off full speed as soon as they hear any killer whale vocalizations. Like if killer whales are preying on a gray whale, and when they're doing that, we have recorded them. They're very vocal as soon as they start the attack. As soon as they're hunting the gray whale, because there's nothing to worry about anymore. They're extremely vocal. And I have sent recordings to John Ford in previous years. And transients have their own call types. Just like residents have kind of their own dialects. Transients, you can tell the difference from, residents. He could tell that these were California transients. There's some overlap in calls among the transients up and down the West Coast, but there's also some distinct California type calls that, were different from up north. So similar to residents in different areas, they have different dialects. And so they're so vocal. He said the sounds were very excited, like very extrapolated calls that they would regularly make, only just like screaming. And I mean, that's what it sounds like, just lots of activity, lots of excitement. But again, when they, start hunting, they're very quiet and they seem to make cryptic calls, like they need to coordinate themselves when they're hunting. And there's other, whales that are spread out when they're hunting. So it's thought that, they make very cryptic calls that the prey are really not so much aware of, very short little calls, but still keeping in contact. So it's, a lot different between the two types. And that's definitely an area that can be studied. That would be interesting to study. They do use passive listening when they're hunting gray whales. Like we always wonder, we don't even see the mother calf gray whales as much, when we're out there. There's only a few passing through each day. Maybe at the most, there might be 20 at a peak time coming through in 24 hours or so. And so we don't see the mother and calf gray whales because they are far and few between, and they're not making sounds. They really don't have a visible blow. They start doing a snorkel blow, very quiet, sneaking across the canyon. But all of a sudden we'll be following killer whales and they will just take off full speed. I've seen them many times. We're just watching them and they just take off, porpoising, like shooting out of the water, sometimes so fast, we can't keep up with them. And I've seen it happen for like 5 miles until they come across and they pounce on a mother calf gray whale. So they can probably passive, obviously listening. Sometimes the gray whales make knocking sounds like that when they approach the edge of the canyon and come on the shelf again to help them navigate. So the killer whales can listen and hear them from amazing distance. So, and then when they're doing that, they're coordinating themselves somehow cryptically so that the prey can't hear. But anyway, that's an area that could definitely be studied. There a lot of work probably can be done on that. It's a very interesting subject.
Fantastic. Nancy, I'm sure more people have questions for you. What's the best way for people to continue the conversation and to reach out to you if they want to learn about your research and have other questions for you?
I'd say go to our, website, CaliforniaKillerWhaleProject.org. And we have on there, we're just developing it now. We've had this, project name for 30 years, but we just officially have the nonprofit established. And now we have more of an official page. So if you enter your email in there, I think it has a way to contact us through our email on that page, and you can ask questions and I will, read those and try to answer them for you as best I can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nancy. This has been just a wonderful, wonderful, informative presentation.
Thank you.
Your knowledge is just amazing. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
One last fitting question that we had, Nancy, which is, what is the best time of year to go whale watching in Monterey Bay?
Well, I guess it depends on what you want to see, but there are whales here year round in Monterey Bay. Summer and fall is a great time for humpback whales, and later in the fall, sometimes blue whales. But every day is different. So right now we're seeing a lot of humpbacks and they've been lunge feeding. So probably because of weather, I'd say, late summer, fall is great for whales and great for weather. If you want to look for killer whales, they're unpredictable. However, in the spring and April and May is the best time to go. And I've been for many years now doing all day trips. They're about 8 hours, but if we see killer whales, my trips have sometimes turned into 14 hours because, we stay with, I don't have like a time to go back. Luckily, I'm driving the boat and I'm interested as much as the people are. So, I'm not going to say, oh, we just saw killer whales, time to go in. So that if you want to see killer whales, the best time is April and May, and probably go out if you can more than one day, because you just have to be lucky, on that particular day. If you go out about 3 days in a row during that time, your chances are much higher. And we get a lot of people that do that, at that time of year. We have lots of regulars. It's like a big, get together party where, we see the same people every year. The really dedicated, killer whale enthusiasts gather together during the spring at that time. And, I take them out on the all day trips, and, that's a great time to go. You can see humpbacks then too. So, April, May, you can see humpback killer whales, dolphins. Late summer, fall would be a great time for humpbacks and, you know, possibly blue whales. Gray whales, of course, migrating in the winter. So, you know, any day, you just never know. You want to pick a day where the weather's nice. I think that's important. Look at the forecast because, you know, we don't go out if it's really rough, but, you know, some days are calmer than others and, you know, makes a difference as far as your comfort.
I just want to say that the time I saw orcas was right after Thanksgiving.
Oh,
so
okay.
there you have it. Anytime.
Yeah, if you, besides April and May, we see killer whales from a couple of times to 5 or 6 times a month. You know, and the fall is another peak. So yeah, you just, you know, pick a good day and, you know, be lucky. Last time we saw killer whales was maybe a week ago, and they were around about 3 days in a row. That's not always the case, but sometimes when they're here, they might stay 1 or more days. So anyway, it's great to go out, and if you happen to hit the day when you see killer whales, you know, that's really exciting too.
Okay, well, with that, thank you again, Nancy. Thank you, Gail, for moderating all those great questions. And thanks, everyone. And hopefully we'll see a lot of you for our next talk on November 17th on otters.
Okay, well, thank you for
Thanks,
having me.
everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Have a good night.
Thank you.